Okay, Ragnhild, it is all yours.
Oh, thank you for that lovely introduction, Nathan. Thanks for inviting me back as well. Yeah, so this feels like it's part three in a series because I had two presentations at the last conference. One was about the memorial, and the other one was about this mysterious supernatural being that was called the Walliman or the Wallowa. So I'm going to follow on from both of those today. Thank you also for the support for the strike. I just wanted to add that I'm not on strike today because I'm in a different union. Orkney College has to be in EIS rather than UCU. Okay, so if I share my screen now, host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Has that fixed it? I'm so sorry. Okay, it should let you do it now.
No, host has disabled participant screen sharing, says still.
Worst case scenario, you can add her as a host and then she'll be able to share a screen regardless.
That's what we'll do. Okay, do you want to try that now? I'm awfully sorry.
Oh yes, here it comes. That one. Is that coming up now? And then I can go full screen. Is that sharing full screen now?
Yes, it is.
Great stuff. Okay, so we had the memorial project with Orkney Heritage Society, as I said, which led to the inauguration of the memorial itself in 2019. And since then, I felt that the project was not over and I wanted to do more about the witchcraft trials. So in 2021, there was a call by Creative Scotland. It was called the Culture Collective. And that call came through the Peer Arts Centre here in Orkney, looking for Orkney artists and creative practitioners to do something creative. But the whole point was that it was going to be with the community. It's community focused. And I thought, okay, here's an opportunity to do something more about the Orkney witchcraft trials. So this led to a project that's called the Witch Experience, and that is a co-creative exploration of the 17th century witchcraft trials in Orkney. Co-creative because as an artistic expression, it's not made by one artist, it's made by all the participants in the project. And that project started in September 21 and finished at the end of March 22, and came in stages, which I'll explain later. But the culmination was that we actually held a witchcraft trial, a reenacted witchcraft trial on the last Sunday of March. And these are the people who took part in that witchcraft trial. Some of these are archaeology and cultural and heritage students, and some are just general members of the Orkney community. And this LARP also happened all over town in Kirkwall in various old buildings. So here we are on the day, the big witchcraft trial day that I'll tell you all about in a minute. But first of all, who were the witches? Now there are around, there are 72 cases registered in the survey of Scottish witchcraft from Orkney. That number is not entirely accurate because we discovered 2 duplicates in there, but we've also discovered some extra names that weren't in there. So I think in total we're looking at possibly around 90 people that we can name. And the witchcraft trials started here in 1594. So what we did for this project was to pick 4 of those: Catherine Craigie, Marjorie Papley, Thomas Corson, Jonathan Rendell. And the reason we picked those was that I wanted a mixture of genders and social class and backgrounds. I'll tell you more about each person, but Thomas Corse, Jonathan Rendell and Catherine Craigie are of lower social class, whereas Marjorie Papley is of high social class. She's also urban, she's from the Kirkwall elite, whereas the other 3 are from the country. We also wanted to include a man, Thomas Corse. That's quite unusual. Men are underrepresented, but we wanted to include one to just show that witches can be men too. Catherine Craigie, she was from the island of Rousey. And she was tried twice, both in 1640 and in 1643. So there was first a local trial, and then she was taken to the bigger court in Kirkwall, where she was found guilty and sentenced to death, and subsequently strangled and burned. Catherine Craigie is a typical victim of the witchcraft trial, in the sense that we think of witches now, we tend to think of an older woman who's skilled in folk medicine, healing, what in Scotland is called a howdy wife, somebody who assists at births and deaths and has some knowledge of using herbal medicine, and also has other practices that we wouldn't call medicine today, but was understood as medicine in the 17th century. So she's somebody who was called on by the community to come if somebody had a fever or other illnesses, to come and help and try and cure them, try and diagnose them first and then cure them. And then it seems that her own family turned against her, because in the trial document, the witnesses are named, and many of these witnesses are also named Craigie. Now, Craigie is a very common surname in Rousey. Could be that lots of people who are maybe more distant cousins are also Craigie. So I don't know the precise relationship between her and all the other Craigies, but they must be related somehow. And they witnessed against her and recalling things that have happened back in time, and witnessing to how the outcome was, and that she'd done it by her witchcraft. Now, her favorite method for diagnosing, now this is her performing magic now, her method for diagnosing that we see her using in the court record several times, is that she would collect 3 stones, and I imagined that she would collect one from the sea or the shore, one from the church or churchyard, and one from the hill, because she uses these stones to find out whether the supernatural being causing the illness is a hill trow, a sea trow, or a kirk trow. It doesn't actually say where the stones came from, though. It just says she had 3 stones, and then she came to the patient's house before sunrise, and she left them in the corners of the hearth to warm up. And then she leaves the stones on the door threshold. And I suppose that will be because this is a liminal zone where, like, a door is a typical place where spirits, supernaturals could come out and in of the house. And then after that, she puts the stones in a bucket of water. And now here comes the diagnosis. She listens to them. And if they fizz or make a sound, she can hear whether it's a hill spirit or Kirk spirit or sea spirit that's caused the patient's illness. Now, in the trial record, it says spirit, but she also mentions the word trow, and trow is an Orkney dialect word that means a fairy, or similar to a brownie type of fairy. So I think Catherine is thinking of these Kirk, hill and sea spirits as a trow, as a kind of fairy type, but it's down as a spirit as well. So the church might have thought differently about them. Yes, and then final stage is to wash the patient with the water. So now you're going, once you know that, aha, it's a Kirk trow that's causes illness, then she can move on to cure it by washing the patient with the water that the stones have been in. And she repeats this 3 times as well. Then he gets better. But there's another interesting thing too. In one case, Thomas Irving, she took him to the shore and out into the water, and then she does a kind of reenacted baptism for him. She takes 3 handfuls of seawater and ladles it over his head with her hand. So it's as if she's baptizing him in seawater somehow. And that was the cure. This happened beneath the bridge at Saviscale. So I'm also thinking bridges are quite liminal zones. Maybe that is chosen deliberately. And Saviscale, that's the wealthy leading farm in the district, also home to Thomas Craigie, who is church elder and the one who brought her in, who turned her in. And Catherine Craig is often seen near Saviscale because Saviscale farm is next to a loch, and that loch is very near the sea, so there's just a thin strip of land between the loch and the sea. And she also takes patients, or in one case the wife of a patient, for a walk around the loch. This also happens before sunrise. So she walks around the loch without speaking a word. And it seems important not to speak, that you'll break the spell if you speak. There are many lochs on this island, Rousey. She could have chosen another loch, but she deliberately chooses the loch at Saviscale. And I've been looking at Canmore, and I've been out there visiting as well to investigate why that particular loch. And I believe it's because of the archaeology there. So there's a crannog, there's a little island in the loch that's man-made, and there's another crannog that is a peninsula that sticks into the loch, which has archaeological remains on it of some sort of building. So she might have felt that this was a Catholic chapel or some sort of sacred past that she wanted to connect with. And also on the shore of the loch, opposite the crannog, there is another Catholic chapel and burial ground. So I think these are the reasons why that loch is sacred to her. Yes, so Catherine Craigie was turned in to the authorities by Thomas Craigie. I've yet to find out how closely related they are. And then we have a whole lot of other Craigies that witness against her in the trial. Marjorie Papley, she's the high class one. She was the mother of the richest businessman in Kirkwall, James Bakey. And James Bakey puts up a huge fight to defend his mother from these slanders. So he gets all his network involved. The accusations are coming from, well, the one who kind of leads the case against her by building up her reputation as a witch is a man called Henry Smith, and he was the minister in Shapinsea, a neighbouring island. The minister Henry Smith had a grudge against Marjorie because he felt that Marjorie had killed his mother-in-law. But she hadn't killed her directly. She had killed her with sharp words. So Marjorie and the mother-in-law had some sort of argument where they'd spoken heated words, and Marjorie had given her a doing of some sort. And following this, she had died. So Henry Smith makes the connection that it was Marjorie who cursed his mother-in-law during this argument. And then he starts a smear campaign. So rumors start circulating, and these rumors seem to have been circulating for many, many years until it finally comes to heads in 1644. And two other witches are brought in for trial who are otherwise unconnected, as far as I can see. Barbara Bundy is a vagabond from Shetland who's turned up in Orkney, and Elspeth Cursitor is from Orkney, but she's from out in the country, so I can't see how they are connected at all to Marjorie, but they have heard of Marjorie, and they are being tortured and pressed for names. And the name that they've heard is Barbara Bundy. So the rumors about her have been sufficiently spread now that even Elspeth and Barbara have heard them. And the rumors are saying that Marjorie had sex with the devil on the sports field outside Kirkwall. And also that she poisoned a man called Thomas Lenchen with some white powder in his drink. And now there's no trial record for Marjorie. So we don't even know if there was ever a trial. She might not have gone to trial. We only know about these other two trials that denounce Marjorie and what they say about her there. Also, it doesn't seem that Marjorie was found guilty, convicted, so she's not been executed. And I think this says a lot about influence and social class. And there's also no evidence in any of the accusations that Marjorie deliberately set out to perform any magic. She's not going about saying that she has magical powers or attempting to harm or cure anybody. It's only through this association with the devil and this possible case of poisoning. The trials in Orkney actually started with a case of poisoning. The 1594 case against Alison Balfour was that she had tried to poison the new Earl as part of a conspiracy with the Earl's brother. So I think this idea that witches use white powder in somebody's drink to poison them was also well established in Kirkwall. It's been established for about 50 years since that first witch trial. Now the man, Thomas Corse, he seems to be a very poor vagabond. He's from the island of Westray. He also seems to have some sort of mental health issue that causes him to lose his memory or be confused. So he has some sort of delirium or dementia or schizophrenia or something along those lines. He's not sure what's happening to him, where he's been, how long, why. And this comes out in his own explanation as, I was with the good whites. And these are land spirits they're the same as in Scandinavia would be called vetter. Yeah, some kind of fairy being that is connected with the land, and he's been with them and struck dumb by them. So he has periods, at least 3 that I can see in the trial, where he's experienced periods where he's unable to speak, and then he's come back and regained his ability to speak, and then he says, oh yes, I've been with the good whites and they made me dumb. He's trying to find a way to survive, so he steals, it seems. Members of the community, the witnesses in the trial, accuse him of stealing fishing equipment and cloth, and also wool directly from the sheep's back, which I find quite amusing. I can just imagine that. And then they seem scared of him. He seems quite frightening. Women are frightened of him, especially one woman who's met him at the mill on New Year's Eve. And he's come to the mill and asked her if he could have some of the flour that she's milling, and she says no. And then he tries promising to her, if you give me some of that flour now, when you go home, you'll find a New Year's present. So they used to give New Year's presents instead of Christmas presents. You'll find a New Year's present. And then when she still says no, he gets angry, upset. And at that moment, the mill breaks. And it seems to be quite a dramatic moment. And the woman's really frightened and thinks that Thomas has made the mill break as retaliation for not giving him flour. And in the LARP, when we played this, the player who played this woman also added a kind of sexual threat dimension to this, that she's alone with a scary man in the mill on New Year's Eve, and it felt quite threatening to her. And then you get the usual accusations like, okay, Thomas visited, and a few days later, my calf fell ill and died. So it doesn't need to be direct. It can be days later or even 2 weeks later and things like that. And he's been giving some advice to farmers too. One farmer says that Thomas told him that if he took the first egg that the hen ever laid and put it in his barley field, that would make the barley grow well that spring. So I can see no evidence that Thomas tries to perform any magic. It's just his general behavior that people interpret as magic. In the LARP, we gave him a wife, Margaret Craigie. She's one of the accusers of Catherine Craigie. In Catherine's trial, Margaret is married to Thomas Corse, and Thomas is ill, and Catherine tries to cure him. But I believe this is different Thomas Corses, that we have one Thomas Corse in Rousey and another Thomas Corse in Westry, although they are contemporary, so who knows? In the LARP, we just combined the 2 Thomas Corses and gave him a wife in Rousey that he had forgotten all about since he has dementia. Yeah, so that was quite a surprise for him in the LARP when Margaret turned up. And the players had not been briefed on who to arrest. So they had to investigate first and find it out. And in the investigation, they decided we'll arrest Margaret as well. So she was also put in jail as a witch. Okay, and the 4th one that we've been working with is Janet Rendell. She was a bit earlier, 1629. She was known as the Spitting Witch. And now here at last is somebody who deliberately performs, and she's cultivating her reputation in the community as somebody with magical powers. She's from a parish called Rendell, and she is also called Janet Rendell. Rendell is not very far from Kirkwall. You can walk to Kirkwall in a few hours or within a day from Rendell, so it's on the same island as Kirkwall. She was known as the Spitting Witch. Interestingly, she's gone down in local folklore. There was a folk story recorded in a book called Around the Orkney Peat Fires, which came out in the early 1900s, that has a story about the spitting witch, Janet Rendell, that has some of the names from the 1629 trial document, but otherwise not many similarities at all. The folk story is very, very different to the trial document, but it shows that she went down in later folklore under this name, the Spitting Witch, and that actually has a connection in the trial, because in the trial she's seen to spit as part of her magical performance. She spits 3 times over her left shoulder. And at another occasion, she spits on grains of barley. There's a cow that's been stuck in the bog, and the owner and lots of helpers have been trying to pull the cow out of the bog, and they have managed, but the cow has collapsed and won't stand up, and along comes Janet trying to help and spits on the barley and then gives it to the cow, and then the cow gets up and is able to walk home under its own steam. It's a happy outcome on that occasion, but it seems that she's using spitting actively as a gesture in her magical performance. The way she makes a living is by begging for food from all the farms in the district, and all the neighbors are getting very annoyed with her. Oh no, there's Janet again, and she'll ask for food again, and so on. And then they need to decide what to give her. Sometimes they say no. Like there's one that says, Janet has asked for milk, and the farmer's wife says, I can't give you milk now because our cow hasn't calved yet. And then she comes back a few weeks later saying, I see your cow has calved. Now you have milk. Now you give me milk. And the farmer's wife is still quite reluctant to give her that milk. And then she feels that she's been cursed because she still said no. So Janet seems to have been quite a person that the community regarded as a kind of pest that went around. She cultivates her reputation for magic. She wants people to think that she has powers, because that's more likely they'll then give her food. And she says in the trial that this power does not come from herself. It comes from this being that she calls Wallyman, that I spoke about last year. And the prosecutors think that Wallyman is the devil. And they say that she's met with the devil up on a hilltop in the Rendell Hills. But Janet herself says that she's met Wallyman at a house, Jock Nichols' house, and she doesn't have that script about satanic, you know, the witch Sabbath sort of script, meetings with Satan on hilltops. She doesn't have that script in her head, so she's trying to describe Wallyman and what he's like, and to me he looks like a male elf of some sort. So in the presentation I did last year at this conference, I connected Wallyman with the Wallowa, which we get in later Orkney folklore from the 19th century, who's also a sort of devil figure there. There's a ritual where you can give yourself up to the Muckle-Black Wallowa by lying on the beach between high and low tide with stones around you. But I've tried to trace this word back etymologically, and I'm pretty convinced that we're dealing with the word alv that's gained a w sound, because that's happened with other words starting in a in Norn. Yeah, so that's Janet Rendell. Those are our 4 witches. Stage 1 in the project, after the cases had been chosen, we had a reading and creative writing workshop series. So I held lots of smaller workshops with smaller groups of participants. like 5-6 people each time. And we sat down and we read the transcription of the court record for one of these 4. And then we talked about what's happening here. Who are the people? What are they saying? How are they feeling? And then each participant chose a person who's named in the trial. So some people chose the witch, and most people didn't choose the witch. They chose one of the witnesses instead. And then they were given the task of reading again very closely what that person says, and try to imagine the situation, and then write that down as a little piece of creative writing. So what we have here is Helen Woodsford-Dean chose Marjorie Papley, the high class witch. And she's imagining the situation where she's having this argument with the minister's mother-in-law, who's here called Catherine, where they argued, and then the minister thought she had killed his mother-in-law with a curse. Catherine came to call soon after my beloved Patrick passed, to pay her respects to my newly widowed state. Supercilious woman, spouting her minister husband's lies that everyone has direct access to God. Clap pray of that new faith, and wholly failing to keep the old fast days. Well, God doesn't speak to me nor listen when I howl into my bed pillows, when this grief floods through me instead of sleep, so tangible it'd be like physical pain. Birthing those 7 bairns was nothing to that. And she sat there sipping small ale in her sanctimonious way, prattling on about her bonny daughter's good catch in Henry Smith, and how well and happy and just bloody bonny they all are on Shaughnessy. And I just snapped. I can't even remember fully what I said, but it would have been harsh, hard words. It was my envy speaking, a sin for which I wish I could confess, but I was not in my right mind. Afterwards, we both sat there silent in shock, and then very properly she straightened her dress, stood up, still silent, just walked out without a word from either of us. Yeah, so this is what still then comes out in the rumors as she killed Henry Smith's mother-in-law. So all the participants did this with one named person from one of the trials, and that then became the character for the LARP. We had a workshop then where we tried out what magic meant in the 1600s and what the practices were. So we tried to perform some of these known rituals and ways of curing and so on, both as described in the trial, but also described like in travel literature and elsewhere. On the left here, we were trying a divination method where you break egg into a glass of water and then look at how the white rises into little spires and things, and try to read the future out of that. And the other 2 pictures are a ritual where you're supposed to use melted lead, but we used melted wax instead. And you pour it through a sieve into water, and then from the shape it takes on, you can see whether the patient suffers from the heart cake. This is the diagnosis, and whether they can be cured of the heart cake or not. So if the one of the lead pieces comes out heart shaped. Okay, and here finally comes the main day, stage 3, trial day. We're using a technique called Nordic LARP. LARP is short for live action role playing. And what distinguishes Nordic LARP from other LARP traditions is that Nordic LARP is very free. It leaves a lot to the participants. So what you have is your character, your background, you know the person you're going to be, but you're not given much direction for what to do. You're not giving scripted or planned events. So the participants turned up in the morning, knowing that this was market day in Kirkwall, lots of people had come in from the country to take part in the market, as we see here. And then since they knew it was a witch trial, the Witch Experience project, they knew we would be having a witch trial. And I had indicated around 4 o'clock so that we could finish the whole thing about 5:30. But what happens from market in the morning to witch trial is 4 o'clock, that's up to them. They did not know who to arrest or what for. So we had a team of investigators. That was the sheriff deputy, and the minister, Henry Smith, were charged with speaking to everybody and finding out if there were witches among us. And then all the other participants were these witnesses who could choose what to say or whether to say it or how harsh to be and so on. And then as the afternoon progressed, the sheriff's team made arrests and they were put in jail. And then at 4 o'clock, they were taken to trial in the museum courtyard. So I'll just show a slideshow from throughout the day here. We had a jury, and folk didn't know in advance that they were going to be on the jury. The sheriff found a jury, so there were pick folk among the players on the day to be the jury, and we also didn't know the outcome. So we held a trial for real and called on the witnesses. Henry Smith, the minister, asked questions. For example, when you say a trow, or you say a Kirk spirit had caused the illness, do you mean an angel or a demon? And poor Catherine was very pressed on this, and she didn't know if it was an angel or a demon. Those were categories that made sense to the minister, not to her. Also, the jury had a hard time deciding on Janet Rendo, because the jury felt that she doesn't really claim to have magical powers. It's not her, it's Wallyman. So can we then convict her for magic when it's not her power? So that was a hard question for the jury in the LARP. When you look back at the contemporary law, it says that it's also illegal to give yourself out as having magical powers. So even if you're just pretending, that's still illegal. So we could still have sentenced her to death, but this jury let Janet Rendell go. So in the end, there were only 2 other witches who were convicted and sentenced to death, and then we took them down to an execution site. Now, I thought for a while I would use the real execution site where the memorial is, but then in the end decided, no, we're going to use a private garden, secluded garden where nobody can see us, and it's not so upsetting to not be in the real execution site. So yes, so we set up our own one in this private garden, and then we mime strangled, but then did not light a fire. We just stopped, and the players knew from the outset that we weren't going to burn, that it would be mime, strangle, and stop. So we'd talk this through in advance, because yeah, I just felt it would be going a bit far if we were to light a fire now. Okay, so last few points now. Why did we do this? yeah, so we're reenacting a traumatic past here. Why can't we just leave that be? And Heritage Society were initially very skeptical and said, no, we can't do it that way. It has to be family friendly. And I felt it was totally pointless to hold a family friendly witch trial. You can't do that, because then you're not engaging with the reality and the lived experience of these people. But yes, so for this part, the Heritage Society was not formally involved. We did it all with the Peer Arts Centre instead, as an art project. So the purposes were artistic and commemorative and educational, and as a catalyst for reflection. So one thing that we discussed with the Heritage Society was whether or not folk would be able to watch. And the Heritage Society wanted folk to watch and for it to be family friendly. And I wanted the opposite. I wanted nobody to watch, only the participants watch each other, but as few, as discreet as possible. So we had it on a Sunday afternoon when shops were closed and church was over and so on, hoping that folk wouldn't see us. Of course, some folk did see us, but we just kept it to the museum garden, museum courtyard, the sailing club, which was the inn, and the private garden, and the house that goes with the private garden, and another old house. Yeah, so we had like 5 or 6 different places people could be, and they could work between them, but none of these were public spaces. The figure here is about authenticity. It comes from a book that I'm involved in writing and editing now, called Guidebook to Reenactment Visiting the Past. We have a book proposal in with Routledge that we're eagerly waiting to hear whether they're published or not. And in this chapter, in this book, there's a chapter about authenticity by Marte Gulliksen and Stephanie Sell, where they talk about realism versus fantasy. So reenactments, so LARP and other types of reenactment, can move on a scale from very realistic to more emphasizing or bringing in elements of the fantastic. So a realistic object-oriented authenticity is carefully recreating the sort of clothes or jewelry or weapons that people would have in the chosen period. Whereas a fantastic and object-oriented is including things like an elven sword or magic wand or things like that. But we are not in this object-oriented. We had just a bare minimum of costumes and props, but we were in the subject-oriented half, where all the emphasis is on the personal experience and trying to connect emotionally, for the player to connect emotionally with their person that they are being for the day, not to act, but to be Catherine, to be Jonnet, to be all those people who were witnesses in a trial. And let's face it, they are a sort of victim too, all these people who genuinely believe that they are the victim of a curse. And they're frightened of Thomas Corse for real, etc. So getting that realism, that subjective realism that's rooted. So we were in this bottom left quadrangle here, where we tried to stick very close to what the trial says and how it actually felt to be these people. So stage 4 was to invite reflection, because that's when you can articulate the connection between yourself and the person from the past, and that's where a lot of the learning comes, I think. So here are some responses from the reflection we had afterwards. I really threw myself into researching my character and started to identify with her. I feel an odd sense of responsibility for Jonnet and the way she's remembered. I could hear them, feel sympathy and empathy for them. I most vividly remember the moment one of the church investigators came to interrogate me at the market. It brought home to me in an instant how terrifying it must have been to live in such a time, realizing that a chance word or occurrence could end your life. what we were doing wasn't just a game. We were recreating real life events. It helped take the history from the books and into my own context. And that was an incredibly valuable experience. So by creating this subject-oriented authenticity and promoting this understanding and empathy, I want us to, this method to be used to discourage hate and blame and scapegoating and bullying and that sort of thing. And prompt questions in the participants, such as, what is a fair trial? What was a fair trial then? What's a fair trial now? Does the law apply equally to everyone then or now? Why are some people scapegoated? Why are some people marginalized? What do we do with rumors about a person? Can we apply critical thinking to rumors? How can we know truth at all? What is truth? Like all these witnesses who believed their horse had actually died because Jonnet had visited them 2 weeks before. Like they believed that to be the truth, but we wouldn't believe that to be the truth now. So is truth relative? Is truth different in different periods of time? Or how can we apply critical thinking? Did Marjorie really have sex with the devil on the sports field? So how can we recognize conspiracy now? There was a satanic conspiracy back then where people genuinely believed that the devil was real and had these secret congregations of witches. Well, what's the equivalent to that now? So prompting all these reflective questions, I would like to take this further and work with other communities who have built memorials and work with schools if I can to apply this method and continue to develop this method into something that can be rolled out in other museums or schools or communities and become a proper network of people who are doing this and a proper research project. That would be great. Thank you.